The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Women don't get voting shares in this company. Never have, never will. My Uncle Richard's voice carried across the mahogany conference table, silencing the room. I felt 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, some sympathetic, others avoiding my gaze entirely. The quarterly family business meeting had just taken an unexpected turn, and my carefully prepared presentation lay forgotten on the table before me. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. Uncle Richard leaned back in his leather chair, his silver hair catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse conference room. "Come on, Elena. You know how things work around here. Your father understood tradition. He wouldn't have wanted this." The mention of my father sent a familiar pain through my chest. He'd been gone just 6 months, and somehow they were already using his memory against me. Dad had been CEO of Barrett Manufacturing for 27 years, building it from a regional supplier into one of the largest privately held manufacturers in the Midwest. And now, according to my uncle, I had no right to help guide the company's future. "That's not true," I said, gathering my thoughts. "Dad made me VP of Operations 3 years ago. He taught me everything about this business. He wanted me to have a voice." "A job is one thing," Uncle Richard said with a dismissive wave. "Governance is another. The voting shares have always gone to the Barrett men. Your brother will represent your branch of the family when he finishes business school." My brother Tommy was 19 and barely passing his freshman business classes. He'd spent more time in our facilities playing video games in the break room than learning about manufacturing processes. But according to family tradition, he would get a vote while I, with my engineering degree and years of hands-on experience, would not. My cousin Harriet, the only other woman in senior management, stared intently at her notepad. The company's general counsel, Stephen Abernathy, shuffled papers uncomfortably. No one spoke up. "This is ridiculous," I said finally. "It's 2025, not 1925. Uncle Richard smiled thinly. "This company has survived for 4 generations because we respect tradition. Your father's shares transfer according to the family agreement. If you want to argue, take it up with the lawyers." I gathered my papers with shaking hands. "I think this meeting is done for today." As I walked toward the door, Uncle Richard called after me, "Don't take it personally, Elena. It's just business." Just business. The words echoed in my head as I rode the elevator down 30 floors to the ground level. Just business that I'd worked 80-hour weeks since Dad's sudden heart attack to keep projects on track. Just business that I'd personally saved our biggest contract when the client threatened to walk. Just business that my ideas for modernizing our production line would increase profitability by an estimated 18%. According to the very presentation I didn't get to deliver today. Outside, the April air was unseasonably cool. I passed our company's sign, Barrett Manufacturing, family-owned excellence since 1947, and felt a surge of anger. My grandfather had founded this company. My father had built it into what it was today. And now I was being pushed aside because I was born a woman? "Elena, wait up!" I turned to see Stephen Abernathy hurrying toward me, his tie flapping over his shoulder. "I'm sorry about what happened in there," he said, slightly out of breath. "Richard blindsided everyone." "Did he?" I asked coolly. No one seemed particularly surprised. Stephen glanced around the parking lot, then lowered his voice. "Look, I couldn't say anything in the meeting, but there's something you should know. Your father made some changes to his will and the company bylaws before he died. I don't think Richard knows about them yet." My heart skipped a beat. "What changes?" "I can't discuss them here. Can you meet me tomorrow? My office around 6? Everyone else will be gone by then." I nodded, and Stephen hurried back toward the building, leaving me with more questions than answers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced around my apartment, replaying the meeting in my head, thinking about all the things I should have said. Around midnight, I called my mother. "I knew this would happen," Mom said after I explained. "Your father was worried about it too." "What do you mean?" I asked, suddenly alert. "Richard has always been old-fashioned. Your dad protected you while he was alive, gave you real responsibility despite Richard's objections. But he was concerned about what would happen afterward. Did Dad say anything to you? About changes to his will or the company bylaws?" There was a pause on the line. "He mentioned meeting with lawyers a few times in those last months. Said he was setting things right. I assumed it was just estate planning." "Why?" I told her about my conversation with Stephen. "Be careful, sweetheart," she said. "Richard has been at the company longer than anyone. He has allies everywhere." "Dad trusted Stephen," I reminded her. "I know. Just tread carefully. This is about power and money. People don't give those up easily." I barely slept that night, my mind spinning with possibilities. What changes had my father made? And why hadn't Stephen mentioned them before now? The next day dragged interminably. I went through the motions in meetings, checked production numbers, and replied to emails on autopilot. By 5:30, I was watching the clock, eager to meet with Stephen and uncover whatever my father had done. At 5:50, I headed to the executive floor where the legal department was housed. The hallways were mostly empty, with just a few employees finishing up their day. Stephen's assistant had already left, her desk neat and computer off. His office door was closed, but I could see light underneath it. I knocked gently. "Stephen? It's Elena." No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I tried the handle, and the door swung open. Stephen's office was empty, but his computer was on, and papers were spread across his desk. His suit jacket hung on the back of his chair, and a half-empty coffee mug sat on a coaster. It looked like he had stepped out momentarily. I checked my watch, exactly 6 o'clock. I decided to wait, taking a seat in one of the guest chairs across from his desk. As I sat, I noticed a folder on the edge of the desk labeled J. Barrett, Bylaw Amendments. My father's folder. I stared at it for a solid minute, debating. It would be wrong to look without Stephen's permission, but this was about my father, about my future in the company. After another moment's hesitation, I reached for the folder. Before I could open it, voices in the hallway made me freeze. I recognized Uncle Richard's distinctive baritone, along with Victor Chin, the CFO who had been his right-hand man for decades. "I don't care what Stephen says," Richard was saying, his voice getting closer. "James never filed any formal amendments. It's a bluff." "But if he did," Victor replied, "we need to find them before." They stopped talking abruptly as they entered the office and saw me sitting there. Uncle Richard's face darkened. "Elena, what are you doing here?" I stood up, trying to appear casual. "I had a meeting scheduled with Stephen. Have you seen him?" Richard and Victor exchanged glances. "Stephen had to leave unexpectedly," Richard said. "Family emergency. He asked me to let you know your meeting is cancelled." The lie was so obvious it was almost insulting. Stephen would have called or texted me himself if something had come up. "That's strange," I said. "He was very specific about meeting at 6. I just talked to him an hour ago." "Well, things change," Richard said dismissively. He walked around the desk and picked up the folder I had been about to look at, along with several others. "Since you're here, I should tell you I'm convening an emergency board meeting next Friday, 2 weeks from the quarterly meeting. We'll be voting on a reorganization of the executive team." My stomach dropped. Reorganization? What does that mean? "We'll discuss it at the meeting," Richard said, tucking the folders under his arm. "Victor, can you get the door?" Victor nodded, holding the door open pointedly. I had no choice but to leave, watching helplessly as Richard gathered what might be the only evidence of my father's final wishes. Outside in the parking lot, I tried calling Stephen. The call went straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Missed you at the office." Everything okay? No response. I sat in my car, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Uncle Richard was moving quickly to consolidate power, calling a board meeting where I had no vote. And Stephen, the one person who might have been able to help me, had vanished. On impulse, I searched my contacts for a number I rarely used. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. Elena Barrett. To what do I owe this pleasure? Marcus, I said, I need your help. Marcus Rivera had been my father's closest friend since college. They'd had a falling out years ago over a business decision, and Marcus had left to start his own company. He still owned a small percentage of Barrett Manufacturing stock, not enough for control, but enough to have a board seat he rarely used, sending a proxy instead. What's going on? He asked, his tone shifting from jovial to concerned. I gave him the condensed version. Uncle Richard's declaration about voting shares, Stephen's hint about change bylaws, and the suspicious events of the evening. That sounds like Richard, Marcus said when I finished. He and your father butted heads for years about the company's future. James was forward-thinking. Richard is not. Did Dad ever mention changing the company bylaws to you? I asked. Not specifically, but he talked about wanting to modernize the governance structure. Said it was past time Barrett Manufacturing joined the 21st century. Well, whatever he did, Uncle Richard is moving fast to undo it. He's called an emergency board meeting for next Friday. There was a thoughtful pause on the line. 2 weeks from today? Yes. He mentioned a reorganization of the executive team, which I'm pretty sure means demoting or firing me. I wouldn't put it past him, Marcus agreed. Richard never thought women belonged in the boardroom. Fought your father tooth and nail about promoting you. What can I do, Marcus? Without those bylaw amendments, I have no standing. Maybe, maybe not. Let me make some calls. Stephen isn't the only lawyer in town who might know something. And, unlike Richard, I actually show up for board meetings when they matter. For the first time since the quarterly meeting, I felt a glimmer of hope. Thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me yet, but do one thing for me. Don't confront Richard again. Let him think you've accepted the situation. The element of surprise might be our only advantage. After hanging up, I sat in my car watching employees leave for the day. Many of them nodded or waved to me. People I'd worked alongside for years, people who respected me for my knowledge and abilities, not my gender. I thought about all the women in the company who might someday want leadership roles. About my 19-year-old brother, suddenly thrust into a position of power he neither wanted nor deserved. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about changing a system that had never been fair. My phone pinged with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Hillview Diner tomorrow, 7 a.m. Come alone. S. Stephen. Finally, the Hillview Diner was a greasy spoon about 20 miles outside the city, far from any Barrett employees' usual haunts. I arrived at 6:45 the next morning, ordered coffee, and waited. The place was nearly empty, just a few truckers at the counter and an elderly couple in a booth near the door. At exactly 7 o'clock, Stephen walked in, looking nothing like his usual polished self. He wore jeans and a plain sweatshirt, his hair uncombed, with dark circles under his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I got a warning call from my assistant just before our meeting. Richard was on his way up with Victor. I barely got out before they arrived." "What's going on, Stephen? Why all the secrecy?" He glanced around nervously before pulling a USB drive from his pocket. "This contains copies of the bylaw amendments your father filed 3 months before he died. He had them drawn up by an outside law firm to keep it quiet. As general counsel, I received the final executed copies, but he asked me not to upload them to the company's document management system until after the next board meeting. He wanted to present the changes himself. But he died before that could happen," I said, understanding dawning. Stephen nodded. "Exactly. And in the chaos after his death, with you stepping into operations and the company stabilizing, it never seemed like the right time to bring it up. I should have told you sooner. But what? He looked down at his coffee. Richard made it clear that my position might be reevaluated if I didn't show the right kind of loyalty. He threatened your job. Not in so many words, but yes. I have kids in college, Elena. I can't afford to lose my position. I understood his predicament, but couldn't help feeling a twinge of resentment. So what changed? Why tell me now? Because what Richard's doing isn't just unfair, it's illegal. The amended bylaws were properly executed and filed with the state. He can't just ignore them because he doesn't like what they say. I picked up the USB drive, turning it over in my fingers. And what exactly do they say? Several things, but most importantly, they eliminate the gender restriction on voting shares. Your father converted the company to a one-share, one-vote structure, and he left 30% of his shares directly to you in his will. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. 30%? That would make me the largest individual shareholder, Stephen confirmed. Richard has 22%. The rest is divided among other family members and a few outside investors like Marcus Rivera. My mind raced with implications. With 30%, I wouldn't have controlling interest, but I'd have significant influence, especially if I could form alliances with other shareholders. Does Richard know about this? I don't think so. Not yet. The original documents were in a sealed envelope in my office safe. But he's suspicious, which is why he moved up the board meeting. He wants to restructure before anyone can challenge him. I slipped the USB drive into my pocket. What's on his agenda for the board meeting? A resolution to formalize the traditional governance structure, explicitly limiting voting rights to male family members, and a reorganization that would remove you from the executive team, essentially making you a figurehead with no real authority. Can he do that? Not if we reveal the amended bylaws. But Elena, Stephen leaned forward, his voice dropping. Richard won't go down without a fight. He's been calling in favors, reaching out to board members. He'll challenge the validity of the amendments, claim your father wasn't of sound mind when he signed them. That's ridiculous. Dad was sharp as ever until the day he died. I know that, but Richard will create doubt. We need to be strategic about how and when we reveal this information. I thought about what Marcus had said about the element of surprise. The board meeting is in 2 weeks. What should I do until then? Act normal. Don't give Richard any reason to accelerate his plans. I'll quietly contact board members I trust, show them the amendments. And Elena, be careful. Richard has more at stake than just tradition. With you in control, some of his more questionable financial decisions might come to light. What do you mean? Stephen hesitated. I shouldn't say more without proof. Just watch your back. We finished our coffee, discussing strategy for the upcoming meeting. Stephen would prepare the legal defense of the bylaws, while I would review the company financials for any irregularities. We agreed to communicate only through personal emails and to meet again in 1 week. As we walked to our cars, Stephen paused. Your father was proud of you, you know. He told me once that you understood the heart of the business better than anyone, including him. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thank you for telling me that, and for risking your job to do the right thing. James Barrett gave me my start when no one else would take a chance on me. I owe him this much. I watched Stephen drive away, the USB drive heavy in my pocket. For the first time in 6 months, I felt connected to my father again, not just through grief, but through purpose. He had prepared a way forward for me, his final act of faith in my abilities. Now I had to prove worthy of that faith. The next week was a careful dance of appearances. I attended meetings, signed off on production schedules, and avoided direct interaction with Uncle Richard whenever possible. When we did cross paths, I was cordial but distant, giving no indication of what I knew. Meanwhile, I pored over the documents Stephen had given me. The bylaw amendments were comprehensive, modernizing Barrett Manufacturing's governance structure while preserving its character as a family business. Along with eliminating gender restrictions, my father had added protections for minority shareholders and created a more independent board with 3 outside director positions. I also discovered what Stephen had hinted at: financial irregularities that pointed to self-dealing by Uncle Richard. Over the past 5 years, he had directed company contracts to suppliers owned by his golf buddies, approved excessive consulting fees to a firm where his son was a partner, and structured a real estate deal that had the company leasing property from an LLC he quietly controlled. None of the transactions were technically illegal. He had disclosed his conflicts of interest in buried footnotes. But together they painted a picture of a man using the company as his personal piggy bank. No wonder he was desperate to maintain control. I shared my findings with Marcus, who had been making his own inquiries. He'd spoken with several board members who were unhappy with Richard's leadership, but hadn't felt empowered to challenge him. "The landscape is shifting," Marcus told me over a secure video call. "3 board members have committed to supporting you if you can prove the bylaw amendments are legitimate. 2 others are on the fence, but leaning our way." "That might not be enough," I said, doing the math in my head. "There are 12 board members total. We need a majority." 7 to 5 would be cutting it close, Marcus agreed, especially since Richard fights dirty. "But I have one more card to play." "What's that?" Marcus smiled mysteriously. "Let's just say an old friend might be returning to town." 3 days before the board meeting, I met again with Stephen to finalize our strategy. We chose a park this time, walking along a wooded path where we couldn't be overheard. "Everything's prepared," Stephen said. "I've authenticated the bylaw amendments and have affidavits from the outside counsel who prepared them. There's no legal way for Richard to invalidate them." "Have you heard anything from Richard's camp?" I asked. "Just that he's confident about the vote. He's been meeting privately with board members, probably making promises or threats." I nodded, unsurprised. "What about the financial issues?" "I've prepared a summary for the board, but I recommend not leading with that unless we have to. It could seem like a personal attack." "Agreed. This isn't about Richard's ethics. It's about respecting my father's wishes for the company's future." Stephen looked at me with newfound respect. "You're good at this, you know. The politics of it. Your father was too straightforward sometimes, bulldozed when he should have finessed." "I learned from watching both of you," I said. "Dad taught me to stand my ground, but you taught me how to pick my battles." We walked in silence for a few minutes, enjoying the spring sunshine filtering through the trees. "There's one more thing," Stephen said finally. "My position will be untenable if Richard wins the vote. I've updated my resume just in case." "That won't be necessary," I assured him. "When this is over, Barrett Manufacturing will need a general counsel who values ethics over expediency. Someone I can trust." The day before the board meeting, my brother Tommy called. We hadn't spoken much since the quarterly meeting. He'd been away at school, and I hadn't wanted to burden him with company politics. "Elena, do you have a minute?" He sounded unusually serious. "Of course. Everything okay at school?" "Yeah, fine. Listen, Uncle Richard called me. He says I need to come home for some emergency board meeting tomorrow. Something about my voting rights." My heart sank. Richard was pulling Tommy into this, trying to use him against me. "What else did he say?" "That you're trying to change the rules Dad set up. That it's my responsibility to maintain family tradition." He paused. "Is any of that true?" "No, Tommy," I said firmly. "Dad changed the rules before he died. He wanted both of us to have a voice in the company's future." "Oh." There was relief in his voice. "That makes more sense. I mean, you practically ran the place with him for years. I just fix the Wi-Fi when I'm home for holidays." I laughed despite the tension. "You do more than that." But this vote isn't about your role in the company. It's about who gets to decide that role. Uncle Richard wants to keep all the power with him and a few others. Dad wanted it shared more equally. What do you want? Tommy asked. The question caught me off guard. In all the strategic planning and legal maneuvering, I hadn't really examined my own deeper motivations. I want Barrett Manufacturing to remain a family company that we can be proud of, I said after a moment. One that values merit over gender or tradition for tradition's sake. One that honors Dad's legacy by growing and evolving, not by standing still. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Uncle Richard wants me to fly home tonight. He's sending the company jet. You don't have to. No, I think I should come, he interrupted. I should be there. For Dad. And for you. Unexpected emotion welled up in my throat. Thank you, Tommy. Don't thank me yet. I still don't understand half of what happens in those board meetings. That makes two of us sometimes, I admitted. But we'll figure it out together. After hanging up, I stared out my apartment window at the city lights. Tomorrow would determine not just my future, but the future of Barrett Manufacturing, the company my grandfather had founded with a single machine shop, that my father had guided into the digital age, and that I hoped to lead toward sustainable innovation. I thought about all the variables, the board members whose votes might swing either way, the legal arguments that could be challenged, Richard's desperation to maintain control. So much uncertainty. But one thing was clear, I wouldn't be facing it alone. I had Stephen's legal expertise, Marcus's strategic mind, Tommy's unexpected support, and most importantly, my father's final vote of confidence. Whatever happened tomorrow, I was ready. The morning of the board meeting dawned bright and clear. I woke early after a restless night, mentally rehearsing arguments and counter-arguments, trying to anticipate every possible scenario. Tommy had texted late the previous evening to let me know he'd arrived safely and was staying at Uncle Richard's house. A strategic move on Richard's part, no doubt. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, a charcoal pantsuit my father had complimented once, saying it made me look like someone who means business. I added my mother's pearl earrings and the company pin my grandfather had given me on my first day working on the factory floor during summer break. Armor of a sort. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference room at headquarters. I arrived at 9:15, wanting time to gather my thoughts and set up. To my surprise, Stephen was already there, arranging documents at each seat around the massive table. You're early, I said, setting down my briefcase. Couldn't sleep, he admitted. Too much coffee and too many legal scenarios running through my head. Any last-minute surprises I should know about? Stephen glanced toward the door before answering. Richard arrived an hour ago with his lawyer from Gibson and Pratt. They've been holed up in his office since. That was concerning. Gibson and Pratt was an aggressive corporate firm known for scorched earth tactics. Who's the lawyer? Patricia Winters. I'd never met her, but her reputation preceded her. She specialized in family business disputes and rarely lost. She's good. She is, Stephen agreed. But we have something she doesn't, the truth. Before I could respond, the door opened and Marcus Rivera entered. It had been years since I'd seen him in person. He'd aged well, his hair now silver at the temples, but his posture still straight and commanding. He'd been a mentor to me when I was younger, before his falling out with my father. "Elena," he said warmly, crossing the room to embrace me. "You look just like your mother did when she used to intimidate all of us at charity functions." I laughed despite my nerves. That's quite a compliment. Thank you for coming, Marcus. I wouldn't miss it. He nodded to Stephen. Everything ready. As it can be, Stephen replied. We're still one vote short of a guaranteed majority. Marcus smiled mysteriously. Let's just say I've been working on that. Over the next half hour, board members began filtering in. Some nodded to me cordially, others avoided eye contact. I could practically see the invisible lines being drawn, dividing the room into camps. At 9:50, Richard arrived with Patricia Winters and Victor Chin. Richard looked supremely confident in an expensive suit, greeting board members with hearty handshakes and backslaps, like a politician working a crowd. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Marcus, but he recovered quickly, extending his hand. "Marcus, didn't expect to see you in person. Don't you usually send a proxy?" "Some votes are worth showing up for," Marcus replied pleasantly, shaking the offered hand. Richard's gaze shifted to me. "Elena, I see you've decided to join us. This is a board meeting, you understand. Non-voting observers should sit along the wall." Before I could respond, Stephen stepped forward. "Actually, Richard, Elena has every right to sit at this table. She holds 30% of the company's voting shares." Richard's confident smile faltered for just a moment. "I don't know what nonsense you've been telling her, Stephen, but the Barrett family agreement is clear. Her brother represents their branch until she marries or he comes of age. That agreement was superseded by bylaw amendments executed by James Barrett 3 months before his death," Stephen said, handing a document to Richard. "These changes were properly filed with the state. They establish a one-share, one-vote structure with no gender restrictions." Richard barely glanced at the papers before handing them to Patricia Winters, who immediately began reviewing them with a practiced eye. "These are easily challenged," Richard said dismissively. "James was already ill when—" "When what, Uncle Richard?" Tommy's voice came from the doorway. My brother stood there in a suit that seemed a size too large, looking both younger and somehow older than his 19 years. "When Dad decided that archaic rules about who gets a voice in the family business should be changed." Richard seemed genuinely surprised by Tommy's tone. "Tommy, we discussed this. Your father wanted to preserve tradition. Elena has manipulated these documents." "Actually," Tommy interrupted, moving to stand beside me, "I talked to Mom last night. She confirmed Dad had been meeting with outside lawyers for months before he died. Said he was setting things right. Those were his words." Richard's face darkened. "This is absurd. You're a child who knows nothing about business or this company's history." "Maybe," Tommy agreed with a shrug. "But I know my father trusted Elena enough to make her VP of operations. And I know he wouldn't have wanted me to have power I haven't earned just because I'm a guy." Board members were watching this exchange with heightened interest. I could sense some of the undecideds shifting allegiance. Richard must have sensed it too, because he abruptly changed tactics. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're getting sidetracked. We have an agenda to follow. If everyone could take their seats, we can call this meeting to order." As everyone settled around the table, I caught Stephen's eye. He gave a slight nod. So far, so good. But Richard still had cards to play, and the meeting had barely begun. Richard called the meeting to order exactly at 10 a.m., asking the board secretary to take attendance. There were 12 voting members present. Richard, myself, Marcus, Tommy, whom Richard grudgingly had to acknowledge given the bylaw amendments now in evidence, Victor Chun, and 7 other directors who were either family members or long-standing company officers. "Our first order of business," Richard began, "is to address the validity of certain documents that have been presented this morning. I move that we table this discussion pending legal review by independent counsel." It was a classic delay tactic. He wanted to postpone the inevitable by time to pressure board members or find ways to challenge the amendments. "Point of order," Marcus said smoothly. "The bylaws in question have already been authenticated by outside counsel. Affidavits to that effect have been provided to each board member." He gestured to the materials Stephen had distributed. "Furthermore, they were properly filed with the state 3 months ago. They are already in effect." Patricia Winters leaned over to whisper something to Richard, who frowned deeply. "If I may," Stephen interjected, "as general counsel, I can confirm that these amendments were executed according to all legal requirements." James Barrett had them prepared by Latham and Williams, verified by 2 witnesses and filed with the appropriate authorities. There is no legal basis to challenge their validity. Richard glared at Stephen. Your position in this company is already precarious, Abernathy. I'd be careful about overstepping. Are you threatening our general counsel in front of the entire board? I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. That seems unwise, Uncle Richard. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Richard realized his mistake and backpedaled. No one is threatening anyone. I'm simply suggesting we follow proper procedure. These alleged amendments would significantly change how this company has been governed for generations. We should be certain of their validity. I second Ms. Barrett's concern, said Dorothy Yamamura, one of the oldest board members and a personal friend of my grandmother's. Threatening counsel for presenting legal documents is inappropriate, Richard. Richard's face flushed, but before he could respond, the conference room door opened. Every head turned as a distinguished older man in an impeccable suit walked in. He had to be in his 70s, with a full head of white hair and the confident bearing of someone used to commanding attention. I apologize for being late, he said, his voice deep and resonant. New York traffic is always worse than I remember. Marcus stood with a wide smile. Perfect timing, as always, Howard. I stared in shock as I recognized Howard Barrett, my father's eldest uncle, Richard's brother, and the former CEO who had retired to Florida 15 years ago. He had been the one to groom my father for leadership, stepping aside earlier than expected because he recognized my father's vision for the company's future. Howard. Richard couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. What are you doing here? Attending a board meeting, Richard. I still hold 5% of the company, as you well know. He nodded to several board members as he made his way to an empty chair. Marcus called me last week, filled me in on the situation, thought my perspective might be useful. Richard was visibly rattled, but tried to recover. Of course, you're always welcome, Howard. But this is a delicate family matter that involves the future of Barrett Manufacturing, Howard finished for him. A company our father founded that I led for 22 years and that your brother James built into what it is today. He settled into his chair, fixing Richard with a stern look. Now, I understand you're contesting James's final wishes regarding company governance. It's not that simple, Richard began. It rarely is, Howard agreed. But I've reviewed the bylaw amendments, and they seem perfectly clear to me. James wanted Barrett Manufacturing to move forward, not remain stuck in the 1950s. The room fell silent. Howard Barrett's opinion carried enormous weight. He had been respected, even revered, during his tenure as CEO. Richard tried a new approach. We all want what's best for the company. My concern is that these changes were made hastily without proper consideration of their long-term implications for family control. James had been considering these changes for years, Howard said firmly. He discussed them with me at length before I moved to Florida. He wanted to wait until Elena had proven herself in operations before implementing them. I hadn't known that. My father had never mentioned these conversations to me. A wave of gratitude washed over me for this man who had seen my potential long before I recognized it myself. Richard, realizing he was losing ground, switched tactics again. Fine. Let's accept for the moment that these amendments are valid. There's still the matter of the executive reorganization I proposed, which would streamline operations and create clear reporting structures. You mean the reorganization that would remove me from any meaningful role in the company I've helped run for the past 3 years? I asked pointedly. Your role has been administrative, not strategic, Richard countered. The reorganization reflects that reality. I opened my briefcase and removed a folder I'd prepared. Before we vote on any reorganization, I think the board should review certain financial transactions approved by Richard over the past 5 years. Richard's face paled slightly. This is irrelevant to the agenda. Actually, I continued, handing copies to each board member, it's directly relevant to questions of leadership and strategic decision-making. These documents show a pattern of self-dealing that has cost Barrett Manufacturing millions in excess fees and inflated contracts. Victor Chun jumped in, trying to salvage the situation. These are all disclosed transactions that the Finance Committee approved. With minimal scrutiny and buried disclosure, Marcus interrupted. I've reviewed these as well. The lease arrangement for the Dallas facility alone cost us $3.2 million more than market rate over 5 years, and coincidentally benefited an LLC that Richard controls. The boardroom erupted in murmurs as members flipped through the documents. Richard tried to regain control of the meeting, but Howard Barrett raised his hand, silencing the room with a simple gesture. I've heard enough, Howard said. I move that we proceed to a vote on 2 matters. First, formal recognition of the bylaw amendments executed by James Barrett, and second, a vote of confidence in the current executive leadership. I second the motion, Marcus said immediately. Richard, seeing his careful plans unraveling, made one last desperate attempt. This is a railroading. Patricia, explain to them that these proceedings are irregular. Patricia Winters, who had been oddly quiet, closed her folder. Actually, Mr. Barrett, everything is being conducted according to proper procedure. The bylaw amendments appear valid on their face. As for the financial matters raised. She paused, choosing her words carefully. My firm represents you, not the company. If there are potential conflicts of interest that weren't properly disclosed, I would advise addressing those transparently. It was a lawyer's way of backing away from a client she suddenly realized might have liability issues. Richard looked around the table, seeing support drain away with each passing moment. I call for a 15-minute recess, he said, his voice hoarse. All in favor of a recess. Howard asked the room. Only Richard, Victor, and one other board member raised their hands. Motion denied, Howard said. Let's proceed with the votes. The next 30 minutes were tense, but ultimately decisive. The board voted 10-2 to formally recognize the bylaw amendments, with only Richard and Victor opposing. The vote of confidence in the current executive leadership failed 9-3, effectively removing Richard as COO. As we moved to adjourn the meeting, Richard sat in stunned silence, looking smaller somehow, diminished by the collapse of the authority he'd wielded for so long. Howard approached me as board members began to file out. Your father would have been proud today, he said, patting my shoulder. You didn't just fight for your position. You fought for the company's integrity. Thank you for coming, I said sincerely. Your presence made a difference. He smiled wryly. Sometimes the old guard needs to step in to usher in the new guard. Ironic, isn't it? As the room emptied, Richard remained seated, staring at the table. I hesitated, then approached him. Uncle Richard. He looked up, his expression a mixture of anger and defeat. Come to gloat? No, to offer you a path forward. He scoffed. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're still part of this family and this company. You have expertise and relationships that are valuable, but things have to change. You want me to report to you now. My brother's daughter. I want us to work together for the good of Barrett Manufacturing, I said firmly. But yes, the reporting structure has changed. The board will be appointing an interim CEO next week. I'll be putting my name forward. He laughed bitterly. You've had quite a week. Discovered you own 30% of the company. Exposed my questionable financial dealings, and now you want the top job. The financial issues will need to be addressed, I acknowledged. But that can happen discreetly with you making restitution to the company rather than facing a more public accounting. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're offering me a deal. I'm offering you a chance to salvage your legacy, to be remembered for your contributions rather than your mistakes. He was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded almost imperceptibly. I'll need time to consider my position. Take the weekend, I said. We'll talk Monday. As I turned to leave, Richard called after me. Elena. I paused at the door. James always said you were the one who thought 3 moves ahead. I should have listened. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. For now, that was enough. Outside the boardroom, Tommy was waiting, his too large suit jacket unbuttoned and his tie already loosened. That was intense, he said with a nervous laugh. Is it always like that? Not usually, I assured him. Most board meetings involve spreadsheets and production reports, not family showdowns. Thank God. I don't think I could handle that regularly. He hesitated. Did I do okay in there? I was terrified. I hugged him tightly. You were perfect. Standing up to Uncle Richard couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, he admitted, but it was the right thing to do. Dad always said doing the right thing isn't supposed to be easy. Over his shoulder, I saw Stephen talking with Marcus and Howard, the 3 men who had helped make this day possible. My allies, my father's friends, people who believed in merit over tradition, in fairness over convenience. What happens now? Tommy asked as we walked toward the elevator. Now, we build the company Dad envisioned, I said. Modern, innovative, inclusive. A place where anyone can succeed based on their abilities, not their gender. And my shares, he asked. I'm still not sure what to do with them. They're yours to vote however you choose, I told him. But I hope you'll learn about the business. Find where your interests and talents fit. There's a place for you here, not because you're James Barrett's son, but because you have something to contribute. Tommy nodded thoughtfully. I'd like that. Maybe I could intern this summer? See different departments, figure out what I'm good at. That's an excellent idea, I said, pride swelling in my chest at his maturity. We'll set it up. The elevator arrived, and we stepped in together. As the doors closed, Tommy grinned at me. So, CEO, huh? That's pretty badass. I laughed. Interim CEO, potentially. There's still a board vote. After today, it's yours. His expression turned more serious. Dad would be really proud, you know. I think he'd be proud of both of us, I said softly. The elevator descended, carrying us toward the lobby where employees were going about their workday, unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in the company's leadership. Soon they would know. Soon everyone would know that Barrett Manufacturing had entered a new era, one where tradition gave way to merit, where the best ideas won regardless of who proposed them. 2 weeks ago, my uncle had declared that women don't get voting shares. Today, a woman stood poised to take the helm of the company his father had founded. Progress wasn't always quick or easy, but when it came, it was worth every battle. That evening, I visited my father's grave, placing fresh flowers against his headstone. The cemetery was peaceful, birds singing in the trees as the setting sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns. We did it, Dad, I said quietly. The company's in good hands now. A gentle breeze stirred the trees, sending a shower of white blossoms drifting down around me. I liked to think it was him, acknowledging in his way that all was as it should be. As I drove home, I thought about the journey ahead. There would be challenges, of course. Some executives loyal to Richard might resist the new leadership. Some clients might question a woman at the helm. But Barrett Manufacturing had always adapted and evolved, from my grandfather's initial vision to my father's digital transformation to whatever innovations the future held. That ability to change while honoring the core values of quality and integrity, that was the true family tradition worth preserving. My phone rang through the car speaker. It was Stephen. Elena, do you have a minute? Of course. Everything okay? Better than okay. I've been making calls all afternoon. The board is unanimously supporting your appointment as interim CEO. No need to wait until next week for a vote. I pulled over to the side of the road, overwhelmed by the news. Unanimously? Even Richard? Even Richard, Stephen confirmed. Marcus can be very persuasive when he wants to be. This is wow. Thank you, Stephen, for everything. Just doing my job, he said modestly. Oh, and the board is also recommending a review of company compensation structures to ensure gender equity across all levels. Dorothy Yamamura is particularly adamant about that. I smiled at the thought of the formidable Dorothy taking up the cause. It's about time. One more thing, Stephen added. Howard Barrett has agreed to serve as a special advisor during the transition. He says he's been bored in Florida anyway. I laughed. I'll bet he has. After hanging up, I sat in my car watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. So much had changed in just 2 weeks. From being told I had no voice in the company's future to becoming its CEO. From fighting for my own position to opening doors for other women throughout the organization. My father had set the stage with his amendments, but the victory belonged to all of us who had stood up for what was right. Stephen with his quiet integrity, Marcus with his strategic mind, Howard with his moral authority, Tommy with his unexpected courage, and me with my refusal to accept that tradition should trump fairness. As I pulled back onto the road and headed home, I thought about the board meeting I would lead next quarter. I imagined looking around that massive mahogany table and seeing faces that reflected not just the Barrett family legacy, but the full diversity of talent that would shape the company's future. And I smiled, knowing that somewhere my father was smiling too.